Yeah, we can start.
A warm welcome to everyone who's here from us at Almost Island. This is the third of our series, Readings and Reflections. And we have a very unusual and special guest with us today, Mr. Makarand Sathe, who is many, many things. And we're very, very happy that you're here with us this evening, Makarand. And talking to him will be one of the Almost Island team, Shoradeep Roy. And we look forward to a very special and very unusual evening. I think, Bharat, you will now introduce them both.
Yeah, thanks, Sharmishta. To quickly introduce our speakers, Makarand Sathe is an architect, playwright, director, novelist, essayist, scenographer, screenplay writer, and theatre historian writing in Marathi. He has written 16 plays and 5 novels. His work has been translated and published in English, French, Russian, as well as in many Indian languages such as Hindi, Kannada, Bengali, and Urdu. He has received several fellowships and awards, including the National Fellowship at Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Shimla, where he wrote a 3-volume history of Marathi theatre, which he subsequently co-translated in English as A Socio-Political History of Marathi Theatre, 30 Nights. A selection of his plays in English translation are 4 Billion Forgetfuls and Mr. Sapatnekar's Child, and The Man Who Saw the Sun. English translations of his novels include The Man Who Tried to Remember and Operation Yamu. He lives in Pune with his wife and daughter. Shoradeep Roy is a poet, translator, and academic. He's currently a PhD student in drama at Queen Mary University of London, where he is writing a political history of the group theatre movement in West Bengal from the 1940s to the 1970s. His latest is an essay on Bengali translations of Chekhov by the playwright, director, and actor Ajitesh Bandyopadhyay in global South Asia, South Asian literatures, and the world. Translations of Bengali poems by Naxalites, Maoist revolutionaries active in the Indian state of West Bengal from the late 1960s to early 1970s in Aina Nagar, and the radio play A Brief Loss of Sanity. Over to you, Shoradeep.
Thanks very much, Sharmishta and Bharat. Before I begin, I'd just like to thank Almost Island for organizing this and supporting me throughout in this particular conversation, and also would like to thank Makarand, who has very gladly accepted the invitation to this particular conversation. I'd just like to start by asking Makarand first about in the mid 1980s, when you had, for the sake of information, in the mid 1980s there was a theatre writing workshop in Theatre Academy Pune, where Mr. Sathe and other playwrights went, and that's more or less where his writing career took off. Just for the sake of my own personal information, because I don't know much about the infrastructure around playwriting, etc., in Pune, and so could you just explain what that workshop was, and A, that, and B, the place that you were writing at that point of time, which was moving away from realist theatre, which has been the more or less staple of post-independence playwriting, not just in Maharashtra, but also in other parts of India. Why did you, A, think of moving away from that? And B, what was it about the mid 1980s that made you move away from there? And also, could you please explain to us the actual circumstances of how things were working then in the mid 1980s in institutions such as Theatre Academy, etc.?
Yeah, there are many questions in one. I will try to answer one after another. Thank you to start with Almost Island and the Shoradeep and Sharmishta and Bharat and all those associated with it. Thank you all the audience for joining in, and good morning or good evening from wherever you are. Yes, there was a workshop in 1986, 1987. It was based actually on a workshop conducted earlier in 1973, I think. And most of the names from Marathi stage that you might have heard who are virtually not writing anymore, or are writing very less, like Mr. Satish Arekar, Mahesh Elkunchwar, Gopu Deshpande, and many others. That workshop was conducted by Satyadev Dubey in 1973. And a whole batch of new playwrights came in. And as you know, from 1965 till nearly 1980, there was a very vibrant period produced by these playwrights and the directors. In 1986-87, by that time, Satish Arekar had become a very established playwright on national level. Jabbar Patel was there, the director of Gashiram Kotwal and Mohan Agashi. They were the three pillars of Theatre Academy, a theatre group from Maharashtra who had produced plays like Ma Nirvan, Gashiram Kotwal, etc. They organized a workshop for playwrights, and this was sponsored by Ford Foundation. Ford Foundation also gave a small fellowship to the playwrights who got selected. They also actually, what happened was that they selected 12 playwrights. It was a 3-year program. In the first year, they asked 6 playwrights, the first batch, to write a play in the whole year. And it was discussed, debated, threadbare. I mean, who's who from entire nation was there. From Delhi, from Bangalore, from Chennai, from Kolkata, everybody was there. And there was a group of around 50, 60 writers, directors, the technicians, critics, who took that play read by the playwright threadbare. And at times that criticism was too harsh, but it helped a lot the playwrights also. In the second years, they selected a next batch of 6 playwrights. So totally 12 playwrights. They gave 1 year each to that playwright to write a play. And in the third year, they selected 4 plays out of that, out of those 12 plays. And they staged those 4 plays, and Ford Foundation paid for the staging of those plays. The directors were also selected, and these 4 plays also got published in form of books. And that is where I wrote my first full-length play, Charshe Koti Visargo, in Marathi, or what is now in English, 4 billion forgetfuls. That time, in a sense, there was a lot of activity at that time in Pune and Mumbai. In commercial theatre, as you know, commercial theatre is very vibrant, or was very vibrant in Maharashtra at that time. It is now, even now, it is very vibrant, but not as much vibrant as it was at that time. In experimental theatre or serious theatre, people like Tendulkar, Arekar, Maheshwar Kunchwa, GPD, Achyut Vaze, and many others were writing. There were many groups in Pune. It had become a bit Pune-Mumbai centric, a bit metro centric, but there were groups in every, at least district place, like Kolhapur, Nagpur, Chandrapur, Jalgaon, all those places, Nasik. And people were doing plays, from very vibrant plays from these district centers also. There is something like a state level theatre competition. And at that time, many really good experimental plays were being performed in those competitions. Like even Tendulkar's Antata Kot Chalu Hai, or Quiet the Court is in Session, or Gashiram Kotwal, or Ma Nirvan, or these plays which then achieved national and international fame, were performed at that time in these competitions. Now these competitions have become a bit counterproductive, in the sense that people have worked out the way in which you get awards, and now really serious theatre many times happens outside it. And unfortunately, due to many reasons which we will discuss later on, these theatre groups from slightly smaller towns or district towns, which were very vibrant at that time. There are still some groups like Pratyay from Kolhapur, or I can name 4 or 5 groups, one from Kolhapur, one from Nagpur, but they are trying to survive. They are trying to still do some theatre, but they are not being able to be as vibrant as they were in 1970s. 1970s, it was a really vibrant scene in Pune and Mumbai and elsewhere in Maharashtra as well. In Pune, there were many theatre groups. They were performing from smaller theatres to huge theatres like Palgandharva Theatre, where normal commercial plays or tamashas were performed. Some successful plays like Gashiram, or these plays were performed in big theatres also. Otherwise, plays were performed in smaller theatres. And mainly, some theater spaces were being created or had been created. One of them was in Bombay, and and in Pune also. They had been built up by converting school halls, school assembly halls, and they became the centers of really serious experimental theater. Nearly all important experimental theater at that time was first performed in these kind of small theater spaces, which were converted from school assembly halls. So these were generally the scene of, practically speaking, of that time. Now you asked me about me being part of it. Yes, I was part of it. I was selected there. In fact, I was writing from 19. I have been writing from 1979. I had written a couple of one acts and many poems and some passages and some short stories, and nobody was publishing anything. And I had nearly virtually stopped writing. And I had also written a couple of film scripts, and it was because of those film scripts that I got introduced to Tendulkar. I had taken my film scripts to Tendulkar, and Tendulkar liked them very much. And he said that, okay, these are great scripts. Let's go to that time. The biggest parallel cinema was being done by Shyam Benegal and Govind Nilani. So he told me, okay, let's go to either Govind or Shyam. They were his friends. I mean, I'm saying Govind and Shyam. That's what Tendulkar said. And we will get them to, we'll ask them if they are interested. I'm sure they will do a film on one of your scripts. Being very young, and I live in Pune, so Film Archives is here, the FTI is here, so Van is taken over by films at that age. And so I was very imprudent. I said that no, in films, the director is the main person, and I don't want to hand over my scripts to some other director, howsoever good or big they may be. Tendulkar, in his usual way, just smiled at me and said that, okay, go ahead, do your film. Obviously, it was not possible to do a film for somebody like me. I was not an FTI graduate. I was a practicing architect. And what happened was that somehow my wife asked me, and some other people who had read a few things asked me to apply for this fellowship. And I never thought that I would get this, because I had written only two. All the other playwrights who were there or who were selected had already written many plays. They were quite reasonably established, not exactly big time, but they were well known. I was the only person who was not that well known, and because Tendulkar had read my scripts and all, they selected me there. And that is where I wrote the play 4 Billion Forgetfuls. I also wrote in that same year another play that is Mr. Sapatnekar's Child, and that got performed. Mr. Vijay Kenkre directed it. It was selected in those 4 plays that were performed in the 3rd year, and these plays were discussed threadbare. And we came to understand, we came to know what we were doing, quite rather to some extent subconsciously or unconsciously as young people. The technique of theater, Dubey was there. I mean, every conceivable personality was there in those workshops that was conducted over 8 days in every year. And then I knew the first time my play got staged, it was performed in a huge auditorium. It got huge publicity, and that established me after nearly 8-9 years of no publication at all, and virtually stopping as a writer altogether, not only as a playwright. And the change of what was happening that time was the 70s period was over and 80s had started, 85, 86, 87. It was a bit pre 1990, that I agree, but one could sense that things are changing. One could sense that things are not what they were. And there was a kind of, till that time, there were huge movements, political movements. There was huge exploitation and corruption and political problems. There was emergency in 1975. All these things were there. But till that time, there was a kind of unilinearity and bipolarity to the socio-political reality around you. And what started changing around 85, 86 and to 90s was this bipolarity and unilinearity I think was shattered. And in my opinion, it started changing around 85, 86, 87, really. And there were obviously 5 elements to it, to be very short, if you don't mind. The first part, I'm not very good at making acronyms like our Prime Minister is, so I will state them as I haven't been able to make an acronym of those 5 things. But the first was obviously globalization. Globalization started around 1990, but it had its repercussions or its initial indications had been there right from 85, 86, 87. And we always pay attention to globalization of labor, globalization of capital, but very less attention is paid to globalization of culture. Few political philosophers do, but globalization of culture is what is bringing in the violence, the hatred, the kind of divisions, vertical divisions in the society all throughout the world, and especially in India. So it started that globalization of culture was really one important thing. Then the 3 M's, the mandir, the market, and mandal, that also came around 1990. So these 3 basic things which brought in the contemporary capitalism to India, the contemporary religion-linked politics to India, and getting the caste problem and really entrenched in the debate in India and dividing the society vertically. And the last, and very importantly for me, especially because it has repeatedly been, I have been trying to deal with the whole thing, is the change in technology from what happened after 1990s or 1985, 1986, 1987. When in 1990s, around 1990s, the PCs came in. The mobiles came in early in the 1990s. In 1981, color TV came to India. Then in around 1983, 84, we had many channels. There was set-top boxes. Then there was in around 1991, there were other number of channels like Star TV, 24-hour news started. Then we had mobiles, then we had internet, and now the mobiles, and now you know what is happening all around. And people talk a lot about technology. People talk it being subversive and being able to help a revolution, etc., and how it helps or does not help poor and all that. But what is not talked much about is the socio-psychological impact of technology. What happens if artificial intelligence come in as far as the social aspect of the existence of a human being and the psychological aspect. So these things change the reality from a unilinear bipolar reality to a multipolar reality, and that made it very complex, that made it very confusing. And once Tendulkar asked me that, okay, you talk all the time. It was in 2000s. I made a documentary on him. At that time, he asked me that, do you think that we did not go deep enough in complexity? Do you think in our times there was no complexity in socio-political reality or in existential reality? What I tried to tell him, I don't know if he was convinced or not, was the fact that yes, obviously, any time during human existence, human existence is complex, and socio-political reality has always been complex, but it has always been unipolar, unilinear, and bipolar. And so the question was, you being there was a obvious tussle between capitalist and a socialist, or a Brahmin and a Dalit, or these kind of realities changed. And it became a tussle between a capitalist and a fundamentalist, or these kind of things change the whole gamut of the socio-political reality as well as existence, as well as social psychological existence of a person. And now coming back to your last question, theatricality in theater has always been defined in a very unilinear way. I mean, the way Tendulkar or Arekar even, or Arekar's theater is not exactly realistic, it is surreal, but still the progression, there is a progression. It's a linear progression. There is a kind of a graph where an emotional graph, it is supposed to rise in a particular way, and the progression ends up in an epitome and that kind of thing. I felt very dissatisfied about that. My experimentation was never in the forms to start with. It was with the way I was trying to perceive, or I perceived reality, whether rightly, wrongly, or whatever. It got slowly, I got more and more conscious. Initially, I was doing it quite consciously. Then I started doing it more and more consciously, trying to deal with this multipolar reality. And to deal with this multipolar reality, I thought this unilinear progression of theater and the definition of theatricality in a unilinear bipolar way uh, was not going to work, or was not going to be able to convey what I wanted to convey. And so I took a plunge in dark kind of, and I really did not plan it. I really did not formulate in my mind very consciously that I want to do it this way. So if you see in 4 Billion Forgetfuls, it's technically a very hodgepodge play. It's technically not a very easy play to stage. And there are many problems as far as theater technique is concerned. But it was very different from what was happening till that time. And I thought that it was necessary for my kind of theater and the violence that I wanted to show. And actually, that was the reason why it was changed. Then it was performed, as I said, that play got performed because it came from that workshop, and because the Ford Foundation Theatre Academy were behind it, it got performed on a bigger stage and all. Then later on, I continued writing writing on those lines. And when Mr. Sapatnekar's child or Mutt what you call Tombia, I think the name of translation is something different. They came in, they were again perceived as extremely experimental. And because PCs had just come in, and I was talking about PCs predicting your behavior, PCs affecting your behavior, PC or computers or mobiles affecting your social relationships, interpersonal relationships. I mean, in that play, Tombia, the wife leaves the husband by keeping a message on his computer that I'm leaving you. When actually that time, hardly anybody or very few people had computers in their home. And or in 4 Billion Forgetfuls, their lives are become currency, where capital becomes a metaphor, and they do all the monetary exchanges on their watch like gadget that they are given. Now we do internet banking and this and that and GPays and rupee pays and all that. It was not. It was probably 25, 30 years earlier that it was shown in that play being done. So I
Mr.
think I have probably I've
No,
taken too long, but yeah.
No, that's fine. I think it was necessary for some of the things that I'd like to ask now.
Yeah.
In your essay on Kamu, which has come out in EPW, you say, and I quote, "We in India have started living in many times at the same time, from the prehistoric to the postmodern," unquote. And
Yeah.
this is something that I found in relation to some of the things that you were saying about unilinearity. In terms of the temporal time in your plays, there is no unilinear time. There is also hardly any sort of fixed space. And I found it interesting, and to just get to some specific moments in the plays itself. So for instance, in one of your plays, you have a Sutradhar, and the Sutradhar often interferes with the action. And the translation of this play is called Crossroads, where the play takes place in what in India would be very familiar, a traffic jam, which has many elements in it. And we also know that the traffic jam is happening because there's a riot that's happening somewhere else. There are two elements here which I think that's fine. That I think holds for almost all your oeuvre. One is that a very serious action happens almost behind the stage, but very near the stage, in the sense that it's almost lurking in the wings. It's never coming in, which is something that I would find in early realist theater with Vijay Tendulkar, etc., where the violent, like action or violence would enter the stage, but you keep it slightly far away, and then you explore a particular moment. But even as you're exploring that moment, you will never let the action to progress. There will be stops, there will be times to like think of what's happening. And in the Sutradhar, I found very interesting because the Sutradhar is not just talking with the other characters, like from being outside of the actual action of the traffic jam, but the Sutradhar is also sometimes even explaining to the audience what they are seeing, like in the sense that he would come and say that in this particular play, you see there is no one time, that there are many time zones and there are many spatial zones. Do you think that at that particular point of time when you were writing these kinds of plays, audiences or even directors were not really dealing with such work? They didn't know how to think of, or how do you present time that is not unilinear? How do you present time that is fragmented on the stage? And so you need a Sutradhar who is interacting with the characters, but also in some senses explaining to the audience the action that is happening in front of them. How do you think that break in terms of time that you brought in, the temporal change that you brought into the theater in your playwriting, how do you think that worked in your overall process of writing?
Okay, I think this Sutradhar mainly in Chowk, and as you say, even at times in they went ahead. Even characters try to explain a few things during a play, or there is a discussion on what is going on in a socio-political sense. Direct the discussion, not only through relationship development, etc., etc., but direct the discussions, direct socio-political discussions, or philosophical discussion, but especially in Crossroads. There were, I think, 3-4 elements came together. One was that, yes, as you said, as I was trying to make sense of the reality around me, and whatever sense I was making, whether correctly or wrongly, was not exactly reaching the audiences. I mean, there would be 20 to 25 shows in small auditoriums or small places, but not exactly reaching them at times. There was a group. There was what has happened because of the 5 elements that I told you. That is also fragmentation in the society. That as earlier times, I mean, in 1970s, the good plays that came in like Gashiram Kotwal or Mahanirvan, they were hailed as contemporary classics. Now, there is a problem in that term itself. I mean, there cannot be a contemporary classic. A classic has to be, a classic can be called a classic only if it can be interpreted over different times in different ways. But it was coined by middle class and accepted by everybody. But with the fragmentation, what started happening was that there was fragmentation of identities also, fragmentation in the society also. So you know, it's like matching the many points that the writer or the director is trying to do, and the audience. Now 3 points may match, 2 points may remain different, because the coherence had gone, because there was a kind of a collage of things. Some points reached, some points did not. It did not make sense at many points, and that was one thing. So I then started thinking, how do I explain these things? And there were 2 guiding elements in that. One was Mahatma Phule's plays, or Mahatma Phule's writings. One of them, I mean, probably or arguably the most important social reformer, not only in Maharashtra but in all over India, because he really worked not only in caste but in class, and for women of all sections in the society. So whatever he tried to write, he had written a play also. It was neither published nor performed for 100 years, but he had written a play. And he had written many dialogues, or he had written many articles in which he tries to explain. That was one aspect of it. And I said, then why not explain? And second, like Phule does. And then, I mean, I'm obviously no Phule, but and I say in the play that I'm taking off from his idea, and if I've gone wrong, I've gone wrong. I'm sorry, I'm no Phule, I can't match him, but I'm trying to follow him. And that play was based on a novel of mine. And that novel is also available in English. In English, it is called Man Who Tried to Remember. And the central character, Achyut Athole, he comes from the novel. And some of the situations come from that novel. One of the sequences from the novel. The novel has a vast spectrum. The play concentrates on one of its sequences. And by that time, novel I mean, something like meta-narrative had been introduced in the field of novel, where the writer talks about his writing process, where the writer clearly elaborates why I'm writing this, try to involve the audience in the writing process itself. And the writing process and the theme, writing process and the characters, writing process and the storyline don't remain as separated. And the novel also does not remain, I mean, does not separate out these things. It is a meta-narrative based novel, and or written in that style. I thought that why not use something like meta-narrative in the play also, wherein these collage-like pieces, these fragments can be made to can be more easily explained. Then there was another problem also, as I was trying to go deeper into socio-political reality and also existential problems, and there was a tradition of very polished performances. What happened was that when we went to Bombay, like please say, and when we performed at Prithvi Theatre, the audiences that would get at Prithvi Theatre, they would like very much the performance, the quality of performance, the quality of acting, the use of technique, the etc., etc., etc. But the problems that I was dealing with, the content of the play, the socio-political content, they were not really very close to that content. They did not identify with that problem. Like saying they went ahead, the problem is how middle classes are totally cut off from the suicides of farmers, and how it is virtually an exploitative rape on farmers. So Bombay audiences would see only the technique, only those kind of things. And when we went to smaller places like Parbhani or some district places, or even smaller than that, where these problems were very close to the heart of the audiences, there the technique or the depth or the intellectual arguments that were being made there, they were not with that. They were not able to identify with that. They were very much used to an older kind of theater technique. So that's why I said that India lives in many time zones at the same time. And that is where I thought that this kind of a meta-narrative kind of a intervention by the writer may help.
Thank you. Related to the question of time is also, I feel, in your place, the question of space. And one of the sort of major themes that came up in after independence and the kind of Indian playwriting that was being done, one would see the predominance in some senses of the, say, the domestic household. And in your plays, even if you work with that particular setting, you would once again intrude the space with elements which are fantastical. So in the case of what in translation is called Dumbo, you have not just an electronic device, but also other characters who are not quite, I should say, like, who all sometimes become artificial intelligence themselves. They no longer remain human. Or in the case of Mr. Sapatneka's Child, you have the clowns. So these are not elements you would usually find in a middle class drawing room setting. So related to the question of time is the question of space. And in other plays, you, for instance, don't work with the domestic setting at all. So in a play that you have written about, where you recreated the Plato's Clave and the Symposium in some senses of Socrates, you obviously in those plays do not work with domestic life at all. But I want to start off first with the other plays such as Dumbo, because or Mr. Sapatneka's Child, because there is a, like, audiences would more or less be familiar with the space that they would see, but once again they would be defamiliarized with that space because of other elements that you bring into the drawing room, which you would never find in a drawing room, but you can do that in the theater. Like, how do you think your thinking about space also changed with respect to the change in time that we have just discussed?
That was because of my probably jack of many trades but master of none. I was interested in not only socio-political or existential reality around me, but right from my school, I was interested in science and technology. And being an architect, I was close to technology also. I was close to art, and I was also always fascinated by the way time is dealt with very differently by different spheres in life. I mean, the way we deal with it in our normal day-to-day life, the way we deal it with when we become old, the way we deal with it when we are young, the way we deal it with different relationships. From there to the psychological time, to the time of people who think differently, who are mentally probably thinking differently, not exactly mad, but in a different sense, how they perceive time very differently. Then there was a time which was philosophical time, which the way philosophy looks at time, like for example, in Jain philosophy, it is said that things are something that are accommodated in space, and time is where you accommodate events. So this kind of philosophical understanding of time, what is time? Is it fragmented? Is it 1 minute or 1 second kind of episodes, or and then the scientific time, where science essentially breaks it up. There is less continuity to it. From that to the way how we seem to be in our different psychological states, perceiving time in different ways. I mean, how we think that the time passes. I mean, even 2 minutes can be extremely boring, and even 2 hours can be very I mean, would pass just like that. And the essential element associated with it, and that goes to the core of one of my other fascination, that is who am I? And that who am I essentially is related to memory. So time is essentially linked with memory. Unless there is memory, you can't perceive time at all. And unless you have a continuous inside memory, you cannot have understanding of me. That the way I understand me, myself, the way I call what Makarand is, or the way I think, the way I understand who I am, is because I have a continuous inside memory of myself, and that is linked essentially with time. And all this jumbled in my mind, and again it got associated with India living in different times. I mean, I would when I would be traveling, I would be seeing a few people sitting by the side of the road or on the around a tree, doing nothing, doing absolutely nothing, and they were not bothered at all. And when I came back to the city, where time had virtually become a commodity, where time was virtually can be linked to capital itself. Time, like knowledge now, is a huge commodity. So time became a very fascinating thing for me all the while. And being interested in science, being interested in physics, the first thing I understood or I got from physics was that time and space cannot be differentiated. So time is a kind of a function of a convoluted space itself, in a sense. Now, let's not go into that details physics because I'm not a master in that. But time and space, I never treated disjointedly. I could, and the way I thought that as linearity, in one of my novels, I said that, okay, things, when I want to talk about things that have happened at the same time at 4 different spaces or in 4 different spaces, how do I talk about them in theater or even in novel? I have to go back in time, go to a different space, and try to say that whatever the episode I told you just now was from 1981 on say Prabhat Road, a household on Prabhat Road. And we have come from 1981 to 1983. Now I'm going back in 1981, but now I'm in a street in Delhi or in New York or in a small town, and I'm starting again from 81 to 83, but the space has changed, the time has changed. And I thought this collage, this juxtaposition was, whether it worked or not, that is for the audience or readers to decide. But I thought that at least as a writer, it gave me a tool to deal with the multipolar reality that I was trying to deal with.
Thanks. I would finally like to ask a little bit about your idea of like the particular play that I would now, and maybe the final thing that we can discuss before we take questions is, why do you think that it was important for you to think through the Greek philosophers in Marathi? Like, why is it that and just think of recreating that scene in Marathi, and not, say, for instance, bring in any moment of like it is a contemporary play, but there is no sort of contemporary reality that we see in that play. Why was it important for you at the point that you wrote the play, the Man Who Saw the Sun, that you thought that it was important for you as a playwright at a particular time writing in Marathi to think through the problems that Plato or Socrates is dealing with?
I think it was not in my mind. I did not read Socrates to write about the play. I had read Socrates already. As I told you, I was interested in philosophy. So I go on. My reading is very haphazard. I read some philosophy, then some physics, then some novel, etc. So I read Socrates and Plato and Gandhi and different political thinkers. And what happened was actually Dr. Lagu, one of the greatest Marathi actors, he approached me, and Atul Pete, who had directed the play, they approached me and said that, okay, Dr. Lagu was interested in Socrates in a very different way. He was interested in Socrates because he was a person who was what you call a very scientific temperament, logical positivist, that kind of and Socrates was one of the first people who used that kind of a logic, incisive logic to reach the truth, etc., etc., etc. And he wanted to write a biographical play on the Socrates, that how he was born, how he died, etc. When he came to me, I thought for 2 days, and I told him that I will not be interested in writing only about history, only about historical plays, unless there is some kind of a metaphorical transformation for the current contemporary times in a socio-political sense or in whatever sense. And I thought that Socrates was very important because of the particular kind of fragmentation and the kind of socio-political reality I was talking about a few minutes back, like the issues of what is truth and what is untruth. See, what had started happening around 85-90 was all these questions that have come to the fore now after 2014-2015, where we get Trump and BJP and Bolsonaro in Brazil and Erdogan in Turkey and Putin in Russia. Now we are talking about violence. Now we are talking about fragmentation. Now we are talking about divisions in the society, etc., etc. Now we are talking about post-truth. Now we are talking about what is true and what is not true, the false, fake news, etc., etc., and the violence that is continuously simmering. Though there is not war exactly like a Second World War, there is a continuous feeling of violence all around, as if it is boiling in the society. Anywhere on the road, anywhere in the house, this violence would erupt. And that kind of result that we are seeing now in those 5-6 years of the rise of right-wing politics, of the rise of hatred in the minds of even common people. And that had started, I think the roots, the beginnings were around 87, 90, and this play was written around, I think, 98, 99. And what Socrates was talking about in a very different sense was about what is truth. was the first point that he was talking about. And that had become very important by then. What is truth? With the TV and with the TV anchors, with different newspapers and different 24-hour news channel, an effort was made to fudge the reality, to fudge the political reality for a common person not to be. Now it is happening at an extraordinary level because of the social media, but it has started already at that time. So that question, what is truth? And people had started virtually surrendering to, and now we have virtually totally surrendered that we won't understand what truth is. There are opinions and opinions, there are truths and truths. And there was a philosophy, postmodernism, which was saying that there are multiple truths. And there was some element of that, some element of truth in that there is no ultimate truth. So that was the first question that Socrates was asking, which I thought was very relevant for the contemporary times of late 1990s or early 2000. The second was that a huge amount of corruption, or we had started accepting that what we talk and what we practice are two entirely different things, especially in politics. What Socrates said was that unless you bring that truth into practice, there is no meaning to understanding the truth. The third thing he was talking about was that you have to stand for the truth, even if it is against the state, even if it is against the powerful state. And that was very important for me. I mean, just 10, 12 years back, there was emergency. And I could see how where we are leading now. And that's why I think the play has become, again, politically relevant, though I'm saying this for my own play, that state has become really so powerful that what Socrates was trying to say, that not only do you behave in that way, behave adhering to the truth that you have understood, but you should stand against a very strong, a very repressive state. And that's why he was assassinated, he was killed. And the fourth thing that he was saying was that how do you stand against the state? Not by doing violence, not by becoming a fundamentalist, not by creating hatred in your mind, not by creating hatred in the society, but what Gandhiji called peaceful satyagraha. So these 4 points, and the fifth was that you have to become, you can't look to some agency, some outside agency, like the police would do it, the courts would do it, a political party would do it, a Masiha would come in, yada yada hi dharmasya. What he was talking about is that every person should and can become an agency of socio-political change. And this is what exactly Gandhi was also saying. And I thought it was very relevant for the period after 1995. And I do think that it is very relevant now. It is in fact more relevant than it was at that time. And to certain extent, I had brought contemporary reality in that play also, in the sense there are 4 characters who do not have any names. They are in the cave of the allegory that Plato had put in about a cave and the darkness and not understanding truth, and slowly traveling towards a more refined truth, and then finally seeing the sun as the ultimate truth. And one of the characters, in fact, asks Socrates that if the sun that you have seen, that is the truth that you have found, and the sun that I may see, or the truth that I may find, what do you do if there are different truths? And that is where the complexity, the modern day complexity, the multilinearity also comes in the play. And so I wrote that play not because I wanted to talk about a historical personality called Socrates or his life and death, and then there is a very important character of his wife, the Xantippe, who comes in only in 3-4 scenes, I think, very short scenes, where she challenges Socrates. She challenges the glamour associated around the philosophers, around thinkers, around writers, which also we find is a very contemporary thing. There was huge glamour associated around the writers. You know, there is a kind of an intrigue, as if writers are gods who create a new reality, or painters, or all kinds of artists. And in today's times, we don't take it like that. We see the text and we see that what I interpret from the text may not be matching that what the writer intends. And the reader is as important as the writer. So in a sense, that glamour, that intrigue about the writer is demolished. And that Xantippe brought in the feminist element, as well as she tells that, okay, you go in and you have parties outside and you may die for your causes. The problem is that as a woman, I'm trained by the society to look after my children, and they are not getting enough food. In that case, what do I do? So what is the relationship between the philosophy, the politics that you are preaching, and my children dying of lack of food? And if then I'm concerned about my children, how come I am wrong? And so all these questions came together. So it was not really about Socrates. It was not really about history. But again, it was about contemporary reality. And it was not about domestic only. It was domestic also, because I do believe, as you will also accept, there is nothing like domestic. Domestic is political. And these times, these spaces, these politics came together. And that was my intention. How much it reached to the audiences, I don't know.
Thanks very much for that. I think it's one of the first plays that I have read in sort of modern Indian theatre that where there was no need for the playwright to at all explain or explain to the audience or anybody or the reader that why should they stage or rethink other cultures in an Indian language, and I found that to be very, very interesting, and which is why I asked you specifically about The Man Who Saw the Sun. Unfortunately, we live in linear time, Zoom time, so we don't have a lot of time. But I would, I'll be very happy if the people who have joined us for this discussion today have questions for you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
If there are any questions, please perhaps. I mean, I think Bharat, it's all right if they unmute themselves and ask the question. I think that's all right.
If you have questions, you can either raise your hand and I'll unmute you so you can ask a question, or you can put it in chat and then we'll unmute you and you can ask the question.
No problems if there are none.
I think Zubain has a question, and I will. Zubain, would you like to ask the question out loud?
For sure. Am I visible and audible properly?
You're audible. You're audible. Yeah, you're visible now also. Yeah.
Okay. So, sir, this is Zubain Sheikh. I'm at this moment, actually, I'm from Pune. And at this moment, I came to Kerala in University of Calicut for the International Theatre Conference.
Okay.
And I have presented a paper here based on Marathi experimental theatre only.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah. So actually, my question is regarding that only. So I wanted to know what is your take on the changing narrative structures in experimental Marathi theatre?
Yes, the narrative structures are changing now, changing very fast, especially after 2005, 2010, really speaking, in the last 12, 15 years. In the earlier times, the writer was the focus. So even the book that the eminent writer and critic Ms. Shanta Gokhale has written about history of Marathi theatre is titled Playwright at the Center. So it was the playwright who was at the center, and the director followed the world very closely, all the time trying to understand what the writer was meaning or meant, etc., etc. And as Sauradeep said, realism was what was dominant in that period. Now, what then it changed to my kind of place where we brought in surrealism, where I started directing my own plays, etc., etc., and where we went to a minimalist style, where we would use least amount of properties, least amount of space. One of the important criteria was the finance. We didn't get that money. And also it was a specific aesthetic and a political decision that if we want to take this place to smaller places in Maharashtra, a great credit has been given to one of my directors, Atul Pethe, who created this structure going all over Maharashtra in smaller places. In district places at least, not very small, but at least some district places, some taluka places. So my place, Mr. Atul Pethe to start with, and then I myself, we made certain that we would go outside Pune and Bombay. And not only for international festivals to Delhi and Kerala or outside India. We thought that we should go to smaller centers in and around. So we would pile up whatever small things we had in a, there's a very practical thing, but I need to talk about it, in a small jeep or a bus or whatever we could get, and we could travel and reach there and perform. In last 12-15 years, one good thing that has happened is that director has also become very prominent. Directors from Mohit Takarkar to Alok Rajwade to many other directors, Nikhil Ratnaparkhi, they want to have their own say. They want to break the script. They want to break it open. They want to have their own interpretation. That is one. And that is good in my opinion. That is, there are different interpretations now of the plays. Earlier, it was the interpretation of the writer, which in a sense ruled kind of stage. Now there are different interpretations by different directors. That is one of the good things. But what has happened is that now, as I said at the beginning, theater has become very much centered around metropolises. Even in Maharashtra, very few theater groups that are practicing now go outside of Pune or Bombay. Even Bombay groups rarely come to Pune, and Pune groups rarely go to Bombay. Maybe a couple of 3-5 shows from Pune group done in Bombay and vice versa. Outside in Maharashtra, virtually nowhere. They use lot of property, lot of finance, lot of money. What they are interested in is going to the national stage. What they are interested in is to bring in the physical kind of acting, the spectacle, the spectacular, and to attract audiences beyond Marathi. There is nothing wrong per se in it. The problem I find is at two levels. One is I'm a bit against making or concentrating on the spectacle in theater. And because if it's a theater of ideas, then you lose it in all that. It looks good. It looks very beautiful, but you lose out on the content. You lose out on the experimentation of the content. There is a lot of experimentation of form. Lot of elements are brought in, lighting, projection. I'm not against the use of lighting. I'm not against use of projections. I'm not against use of technique in any sense, but they have become more and more spectacular because they want to attract us. Now there is a kind of a culture developed, in my opinion, which can be called as national kind of theater where you can go beyond language. I don't accept that anything. I mean, why compare like beyond? I mean, beyond is a very judgmental term. I mean, obviously, what paintings can convey, words cannot. What words can convey, painting cannot. So going beyond and all are beyond me. If that theater can convey that meaning, but I do find, and I have to be critical here, that a lot of experimental theater that is happening now in Maharashtra, it is very vigorous, it is very spectacular, it is very different, but it, in my opinion, a large portion of it is devoid of experiment in content itself. It is a kind of a festival circuit where you can go and perform.
Thanks very much, Mr. Sathe. Do we have another question, Bharat? Should we? I think we are.
Yeah, we have a question from Ashutosh. Do we have time to take another question? I think we can take one more.
Maybe one more, yeah.
Yeah. Ashutosh, would you like to ask a question?
I'm not able to either see your.
Yes.
Hello. Hello.
Yeah.
Hi, Ashutosh, go ahead.
The question I wrote on the chat box was, what future do you see for theatre in today's highly polarized, fragmented, social and virtual reality of India today? How would theatre try to do anything good for India today, considering the grossly, what we say, polarized atmosphere here? Thank you, sir.
Okay, I will try to answer. I think there are two, three, four aspects to it. One is the commercial aspect to start with the OTT platforms, with everybody working from 9 in the morning to 9 at the night, huge metropolises coming home at 9 o'clock, then having a glass of beer, sit in front of OTT with your dog and your some eateries, and that is one commercial aspect where people are not interested in going out to serious theatre or experimental theatre or barter. Even for commercial theatre, even commercial theatre is facing this problem. So that at one commercial level, there is a problem. At the other level, it is at the level, as I said, of interpretation of the complex socio-political reality. As you said, polarization. As you said, fragmentation. How to bring this together? What is happening is, as I briefly in passing mentioned, that a play like Gashiram Kuatwal was loved by a much larger section of the society. Now, what is happening is that even if one play by Jayant Pawar or one play by Shafat Khan or one play by Makaran Sathe is reasonably successful, it attracts a section of the society. It doesn't reach more than that. Actually, there has always been a problem that Marathi experimental theatre has always been a middle class affair. So we have to accept this limitation that has always been there. When we say that in 1970s, plays like Gashiram Kuatwal and a few other plays were hugely popular, etc., this limitation has always been there. So there is a problem there. But especially if you are dealing in a fragmented and polarized society, it is very difficult to get an audience who will be with you. And when you are not chauvinistic, when you are not taking one side, but are dealing in gray areas and are trying to understand this gray area without becoming fundamentalist, without becoming terrorist, or without becoming a atireki yourself, or taking a one-sided position yourself, but still in this chaos, trying to have an opinion, trying to have a political say. I'm not saying that this is chaos, you are in gray area, you don't need to take a position. I do feel that you need to take a very strong political position, but it needs to be without chauvinism, without a kind of aggressive, greedy, competitive spirit in you. So this is a very tough kind of challenge on the level of content as well as on the level of form. But I do think that because everything is becoming digital, because all our life is now ruled by images and nothing else. What we see all the time are images, where four people are sitting around a table and they're all four are looking at the images in their emails, in their iPhones or phones. When you go to a restaurant, even a three-year-old child comes in, the parents hand over a phone is his or her hand, and the child goes on seeing images on the phone. In this world of images, in this world of artificial intelligence and artificial reality and digital reality that is going to come very soon, the real-time theater or the liveness of theater is going to be attractive, in my opinion. Maybe I'm too hopeful. Maybe I'm a die-hard theater fan. I think this reality of life, this life of theater, will attract audiences again, and the audiences will think that yes, this reality, this theater as life live form, and not an image where I mean, audiences have got now dead about violence that they see, about sex that they see. But in theater, it becomes very live. It becomes very far more effective. And so the audiences may come back to theater, and it will become one of the important mediums to express yourself and to have a live cultural interaction, which is so necessary for the success of a democratic society.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I think we have shot over the time now.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't think we can take any more questions, but thanks very much, Makarand.
Thank you very much. My pleasure. It was great to be on the show. Yeah.
Thanks. Do we have any parting words from? Sharmishta or Bharat, would you like to? Sharmishta, we can't hear you.
Sharmishta, you have to mute.
Sharmishta, you have to unmute yourself.
Sorry. No, I just wanted to say thanks very, very much to Makarand for giving us a, I don't listen to playwrights that often. And this was a very, very interesting opportunity for me to listen to a very different kind of playwright. So thank you for giving us your time. And Shoradeep, is there anything you...
Pleasure.
Yeah, just thanks very much to you, Makarand, for giving us your time. And also many thanks to Almost Island for giving us the space to discuss these things at fairly, what I thought was very, very important and enlightening for me. I could finally get all my questions, which have been with me for 3 or 4 years of reading Makarand's plays.
And thank you very much, all of you.
And we're getting a lot of thank yous on the chat box, and everyone's saying it was very, very nice. So
great. I'm happy. Thank you very much.
All right.